Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're glad you're here. And our guest today is Chris Kelly. And Chris, I'm so glad that you're here too.
Well, I thank you for having me. I always enjoy talking about this subject matter.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Mm.
Really, it is and interesting to me. And let me just read a little bit of your bio here so people know a little bit more about you. And so Chris Kelly joins us from his Old World Exploration channel, where he explores pictures, postcards, and other evidence of old world buildings, architecture, and ancestors. A builder by trade, Chris presents buildings predominantly from the North American continent with architecture that doesn't fit the given historical narrative. And he has a new book out that was co authored by John and Melissa Reiser called The Matrix Reloaded Yet Again. And he has at least two other coffee table books with pictures of demolished old world buildings and a calendar also that's available on his merchandise shop. And all
Mhm.
those links are below for you all
Thanks
to
for that,
check
Carla.
out.
Yeah.
Oh, you're very welcome. So, Chris, I just wanted to say that my husband and I really enjoy your channel, and it's just so interesting and everything. So, and
I appreciate that. I've been at it for just over 3 years now on YouTube, and I've been into the subject matter for about 4 years. So I had about a year primer to get my stuff together before I decided I needed to share what I was finding. That's kind
right.
of what.
So what drew you into doing your research or
I don't really know. I think the world was in the thick of the lockdown measures and all the rest of it, and so I was getting pretty browsy online, and always been interested in architecture as a carpenter and builder. Um, always interested in and appreciate things that would be difficult to accomplish. Always liked that kind of stuff. I've done a lot of higher end finishing work, um, and then I started looking at some of these old buildings, and didn't really. I couldn't connect the two. My perception of the past and what I was seeing weren't. I wasn't able to lock the two together. And my critical eye was telling me that. I just can't envision how they built this specific building in the timeline we're being told. So that sort of got the ball rolling on me investigating, and I just started looking for more and more pieces of visual evidence, and it just became overwhelming. So this doesn't make sense with what we're told about history. Something's not right about the story we're being told. That's kind of what drove me to making these videos.
yeah, well, very good. So for those who are watching that would just want to find it interesting and start their own exploration of it, what are some of the things that would be real specific that they could look for, or that are, the general things that are like red flags for you?
Well, for me, visually, the architecture with the overuse of decoration, especially in the higher reaches of the buildings. So you've got, um, for instance, post offices with domes and a very elaborate and ornate decoration, especially in the very higher area reaches of the building. To me, that's a red flag. When you get to that point of the build process, there's a sense of expediency to close up the building, and there's not, let's drag this out for another year and put all of these decorations on there. So that's one of the things that I would look for is like um, overly ornate structures for their purpose, I think is a big one, you know?
Right. Well, and like you were saying, the why extend the process, right? So if you and make it take another year longer
Mhm.
to make it ornate, but I know in hearing the narrative and reading some of the narrative about some of these buildings, the whole buildings were built in a year
Mhm.
in many of them. So
That's a bit of a problem, isn't it? It's Yeah, and so if we look at the modern day, the amount of work that goes into constructing, let's say, for instance, a 10-story structure, you have to go pretty deep for one thing. You need a serious excavation because you need to properly lay the footing and foundation work for these structures to remain stable over time, which is usually an extensive process that takes quite some time. And in the modern day, we have all sorts of equipment, hydraulic One of the big ones for me is hydraulic power. We started really efficiently using hydraulics in the early 1900s, using petroleum products. Before that, it was water, and it wasn't really as efficient. But that really expedited the excavation process for us. But a lot of these buildings were built before that happened, so then we're really just getting down to elbow grease and horsepower and mechanical advantage with ropes and pulleys to explain away some of the excavations for these massive structures. And the timeline just doesn't allow for it. Often, I think they've even haven't accounted for um, the uh, the work done below ground when they're telling us the timelines on these. I think they're just trying to explain what we see. So there's a lot of problems with a lot of buildings we couldn't build in the timelines that we're given in the modern day with modern equipment, and they're telling us this was done without all of those advances in technology in the late 1800s. So it doesn't
Right.
make sense.
So, because even like the electric drills and things like that that you
Yeah.
could use, they weren't usable at all. They weren't around to use right until what, almost 1900, right? 1890s or something.
Yeah, that's what they say. 1895 was the first power, and that would have been a very rudimentary form, and I don't think it would be a widespread um, in use at that time. You know, And that's the problem with a lot of this. A lot of what we're told about these inventions and the implementation of this technology just seems to happen too fast and in too many places at the same time. I'm thinking right now of, you asked earlier about what are some of the indications to look for. The streetcar narrative, so trolleys in towns, is a big one because that technology appears to have exploded almost in an instant in the late 1880s across the world, actually, which doesn't make any sense because there seems to be no allowance for this technology to become absorbed into different cultures and to be implemented into these cities and towns. And that's the funny thing too. Is so growing up, I always thought with trolley cars, I always thought San Francisco. That's the big
Mhm.
one, and I thought maybe a couple other big metropolitan centers may have had them. But through my research, and you mentioned, I think before we went on air, how many cities I've covered on my channel. It's got to be over 100 now in North America alone. And I cover large cities and small cities. And I don't think I found a city yet that doesn't have a trolley car. It's
Which,
almost every city.
which is amazing. Like, I've grown up in the Midwest, in rural areas, in little towns, or in the
Mhm.
country, and we're always, I don't know, 5 years at least, sometimes 10 years from behind on trends of the east and west coasts, that especially things that would take time to develop and learn the trades. And so that there's a big marker, right, that you might find them in Kansas City or Topeka, the capital of Kansas,
Mhm.
instead of just the east and west coast.
That's in the modern day too. So you can imagine the lag time on the trends back when the only way you were getting information across was a telegraph or train or horse or whatever it might be. You know, so again, the timeline doesn't allow for these inventions to move that quickly. So there seems to be something wrong with and that's sort of the gist of my channel is there's something wrong with our historical timeline. I get some people come into my videos and they don't really understand the angle I'm coming at, and they think, well, I'm saying these buildings didn't exist, or I'm saying they were built by aliens, or like I'm not suggesting anything specifically. I'm just saying that our timeline of history, I think, has been altered. That's the main message of my channel.
So how do you personally, I mean, like, you don't go into it in your channel much, but how do you think, or it was changed, or why do you think it was changed, and why aren't we given the truth?
That's an interesting question. There are all sorts of theories that I can get along with to certain points. I do think that there was a massive cataclysm here, bigger than we can really comprehend, and I think this gets right down to the spiritual level. That we have been sort of densified in our existence here, And I don't. I think what we're looking at when we look at the old buildings is sort of remnants of a much more harmonious civilization and people. And something happened, or was allowed to happen, where we have these malevolent entities which have been steering society for as far as I can look back to the time when they were really implementing their power structure. Something happened which allowed them to take control here, and then there was a process of them, making sure they had all their controls in the right place. So really, this gets down to the spiritual level, I think, and um, I think what they've done is hijacked the structure that's left from this old world civilization, and used it for their own um, glorification. For instance, we tend to look at a lot of the buildings attached to aristocracy and monarchy and attribute those constructions to those aristocracy and monarchy. We do the same with the church, with all the churches. I don't believe that they were responsible for building these structures. I believe that this whole network of architecture and infrastructure was hijacked, and it predates those forces. So it's kind of complicated and very abstract, and it can get very what's the word? It's hard to explain, but it's almost like there's an overlaying of timelines. The timeline we were on and the timeline we are on right now. Um, so it's fairly complicated concept. It can get pretty muddy, but that's sort of the gist of it.
Yeah, well, because it seems to me that perhaps it was hijacked several times, or at
Mm,
least more than once. Say, like the cathedrals.
mm,
Some of the ones that look older to me,
mm,
right, are almost. I meant you can't deny that it's gorgeous architecture, but they're almost creepy.
mm.
It's some of them seem to me to be really. I don't know, just almost dark in it,
Yeah.
right? Whereas some of the other cathedrals are a different style of building, but they don't have the dark feel. It's more of the openness. So
Mm,
it makes me wonder if, uh, just as, say, the timeline was changed or things were hijacked along the way, like you said,
mm.
the different generations of the ancestors, some were. Um, not helpful, right? Or
Sure. Yeah.
dark. And
Yeah.
then some were of more of the God mindset, more expanded and light and abundance type of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, that's a good point, and I can get behind that as well. It's I would love to know for sure. All we can
yeah.
really do is speculate. And a lot of people have said some of these buildings may have been modified, which is a possibility as well. Um, I think there's definitely a technology that has been lost. Um, we can get right into the Tesla technology, and the harnessing of the ether for the energetics of this um, architecture and infrastructure, and potentially something that has been erased from our consciousness. Something that we've been told is impossible, may have been widespread. So there's so much that you can do to speculate. The furthest I can go for sure is just to show the buildings and the timelines and the infrastructure, and just try to illustrate to people that there's a problem here with the timeline. After that, we can discuss it all day long, I think, and it's fun to do that. And I think it's helpful to interact and do that, because I think I say this all the time on my channel, when you put two heads together, you can come up with a much more interesting picture than just
Hmm.
one person. You know,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It like sets out sparks in our minds.
it does. It does exactly. So important for us to interact, and it's a nice time to be alive in the fact that you and you're in the States, I'm up here in Canada, and we can have a conversation about this subject matter. It's well, you couldn't have done this 20 years ago.
Yeah.
You know.
It's just awesome. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
And life in general. I mean, you can say of the name the negative things going on and everything, but it's like it's an exciting time to be alive. It really is. In all these old occulted truths, right?
Hmm.
Coming into view and finding out new things and how we can maybe use them or how it would benefit us, or
Yeah.
how our ancestors used to live. I mean, ancestors are uh, important, I guess, to all of us, but
Yeah,
they're huge on. We wouldn't be here without them, but they're huge on me. I do ancestral clearing work in
yeah.
my in biofield tuning,
Mhm.
and I would love to know more. I've met some of my ancestors through meditation and vision and things, but to really know how they lived and what went on to change the timeline and things would be really interesting to know.
Yeah, I would be interested to know your take on the whole orphan phenomenon, which was very prevalent in the 1800s. In relation to that, to the ancestral part of it, I think there's. I mean, what do you think of that? Have you looked much into that?
Yeah, some. I mean, I can't say I'm a professional on it or anything. Just my
Hmm.
opinions, but
Yeah.
it's what bothers me most. I guess outside of that we've all been lied to, obviously about some things, is from my work in the biofield to see um, the fear and the energetic blocks and the irregularities and the denseness of um, changing a person's mindset from that mindset of God to the mindset of lack and fear
Hmm.
and control is, I think the manipulation of the birthing things through incubator babies,
Hmm.
whatever happened there, and the orphan trains and everything. Those people, uh, I think, because of all that. I don't know if you call it damage, but definitely all the negative, um, all the emotions that they and feelings that they endured and would have had resistance to,
Hmm.
that clogs their biofield and then changes their mindset because
Hmm.
it changes our energy, sets the stage for so much of the junk and inner healing that's what we have to do now
Hmm.
to correct it all. And I guess I'm very passionate about that.
Hmm.
How
Yeah.
the damage that it
Yeah.
did people,
Well,
right?
it's interesting you say that. I know you've spoken with Michelle Gibson before as well, because a lot of her theory on this has to do with a circuit board type energetic system that was hijacked. And this negative energy that you're sort of touching on seems to be almost like the mechanism of for them to keep their power structure intact. They're feeding off this negative energy that has been induced and perpetuated, you know. So it
Mhm.
sort of seems to align with some of her theories on that, what you're getting at there. Like they were almost relying on this negative energy, fear, and all the rest of it to maintain their power structure.
Yes, and what I kind of how I perceive things through my work is that, like, um, when people die, of course, we're meant eventually to return to the other realm,
Hmm.
like to the oneness or to heaven or whatever from whence we all came, because we're
Hmm.
all made of God. But it's like because of all that dense energy created by all these traumas in our lives, then a lot of times, if people haven't done the inner healing or spiritual seeking here in this life, then which many people for generations didn't know anything about, right? That's
Hmm.
a new phenomena, basically, of the last, what, 20 years or
Hmm.
so, 30
Hmm.
years for sure, for
Hmm.
it to be a widespread. And so what I experience is that so many of those ancestors through the last centuries stayed in the what I call the waiting place, just in nature around us, and
Hmm.
they're very low voltage because their bodies are gone and the sun charges our bodies,
Hmm.
and so they're missing that component. Plus, their mindset is still the mindset of the lack and control versus the mindset of God that we're meant to have. And and so yes, I think that I don't know if the system ties in directly to their specific energy, but
Hmm.
I do really feel that in keeping that knowledge and in and whatever um, traumas they experience in creating those traumas for their lives that changed all their energy, that in itself prevents a lot of the expanded mindset and expanded energies, that we could use for good. So they
Hmm.
very well could be tapping into at least that
Hmm.
energy and preventing it from being used for good.
Yeah, it seems like we have been detached from the spiritual. There seems to have been a systematic process of, you think of moral relativism. There's no really right and wrong. Everything's sort of muddy and gray. That seems to be the messaging we get in our modern day. Um, and they're actually trying to shift us over, I think, into the darker side of things with pop culture. And
Yeah.
so there seems to be some sort of desperate attempt to retain that perception to, because a lot of us, I think, are moving away from their control system. As like you said, the last 20 or 30 years, people seem to have been more embracing more of that spiritual side. And
Mhm.
I think there's a desperate attempt to maintain that dark energy, especially through pop culture. I think that's a big one, but also through education. Science is also a big one. Science can be used
Yeah.
against the spiritual. So all of these things sort of work, I think, in conjunction to move us away from that aspect of ourselves. So there seems to be a coordinated attempt there, from what I can see. Yeah.
And just like in would have happened to the ancestors in, say, if there was a culture or the generations that were good and were kind of taken over
Hmm.
by the um, more of the negative mindset, it um, things happen that way now too, right? It might start good, or say even the change perhaps to spirituality where more people are seeking. So it's really good for several years,
Hmm.
kind of like, I'm just supposing here,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
then if the just like we see in, say, politics or the other occulting of information, then they infiltrate, right?
Hmm.
People are planted, so to speak,
Yeah.
and start this working, connecting, interacting with the people who are doing the good to help steer that mindset into still higher, but off track from
Hmm.
a central purpose of good, right?
Yeah.
And the people don't know,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
And so I've heard
unless
some people refer to that as a limited hangout too, where people will try to
uh,
hijack a topic of study and then steer it. I think it was used as a technique in intelligence agencies. But I hear that come up a lot in this field of research too. Some people are limited hangout. They're trying to steer people's perception and tell you what it is instead of leave it open for discussion, right?
okay, yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah,
But
that's
I
a
was
good
gonna I
word.
was gonna ask you about Atlantis. So when I was 25 years ago, I started getting into alternative research. The whole topic of Atlantis really interested me, and then the Edgar Casey prophecies. I'm guessing you're aware of these things. I'm sure you are.
I'm aware of Atlantis and stuff. I haven't studied the Edward Casey
So
things.
I find it interesting because there seems to be a bit of a correlation with what we're seeing with the old world and the Atlantis rising, and I'm wondering if um, maybe there's a connection between us discovering our true past, being more so Atlantis rising rather than a
Hmm.
continent coming up through the ocean. I've hypothesized
Yes,
on that before, but I mean, there's different terms for a lot of these things, but there could be a connection there where we're now rediscovering our true past, and maybe that's
I I
part of that.
like that. Yeah, I
Mm.
really like that. Well, and do you think, talking about Atlantis, do you think the whatever it was, the great mud flood or of that you see evidence in some of the buildings, or some people would suppose the great flood, like spoken of in the biblical
Mm-hmm.
narratives and things,
Mm-hmm.
that may have caused or resulted in Atlantis being underwater. So, do you think that those were specifically tied in at the same time as the old world structures?
Yeah, I think it's possible that both of those two stories might be the same incident. And what has happened is our timelines have been altered. So we've been trained to push the Great Flood back to when would that have been? Like 8,000 years ago, biblically, or something like that. I'm not sure.
A long time.
Atlantis,
Yeah.
12,000 years ago. Some people are hypothesizing. I
Hmm.
think all of those timelines, I think, have been obscured. And we are finding there are researchers that have done some interesting work. Fomenko comes to mind, a Russian mathematician. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but using math, he's discovered that they seem to have repeats in the timeline, using the same algorithm over for different characters. For instance, Louis the 14th, were there really 14 Louis?
Right.
So a way for them to extend the timeline and then fit in what they need to. I think it's an interesting hypothesis. I don't trust any history that I can find in a history book, because I think
Right.
it's there for a reason, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
Hmm.
So I
You
was,
want
oh, go
uh,
ahead.
do you want to see some visuals?
I'd
Would you
love
like me
to.
to share
Yeah.
some?
Yeah, go
Sometimes
ahead.
they can be inspirational.
Hmm.
I'll share my screen with you. And I'll start with my books, my two coffee table books.
Please. Yeah. Yeah.
They are um, they're all in North America. All of these are all demolished buildings that have been demolished, and I think it's people have found it quite interesting that these buildings even existed here on the continent. So it can be a nice starting point for people getting into this. Okay, so I've shared my screen. So these are my two books, and they're available through my channel, as you mentioned in the intro. This is the first one, and then the second one. So both of them contain 101 um, structures that no longer stand here in North America.
Wow. Hmm.
Hmm. I like this one, and this is Duluth. This is the Opera House in Duluth. My mother's from Duluth.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
beautiful.
yeah. So we can roll through, and I have a little bit of a narrative. So I like to add the given historical narrative to a lot of these,
Hmm.
and we can muse on these if you like.
Sure, sure.
Yeah. So this was kind of what I was getting at, what to look for in the old world architecture. Um, you can see how many domes do we have on here? 1, 2, 3, 4, potentially another one in the back. 5 domes. This is a hotel in Indianapolis, supposedly built in the 1890s. I say supposedly because, like I said, I don't trust these timelines. Thousands of buildings seems to have gone up all over the place in the 1890s, and there certainly is no way we had the population or the means to do that. So, so to me, it's an obvious distortion of the timeline.
Hmm. Yeah.
And another problem with these is that they were torn down so quickly. So this is built in the mid 1890s, beautiful looking hotel,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
they tear it down in the 1940s, 50 years later.
yeah. When they let homes stand, right? The even ramshackle homes stand for a lot longer than 50 years.
Yeah, I live in a house built in the 50s, so that's 70 years old now. So it's and this thing was made of stone. I don't know if you can sort of make out the quality of construction on these is amazing. And look at these little mini turrets around this part here. It's
Yeah. That's
uh,
spectacular.
mhm. Another thing too that jumps out at me is the infrastructure. So the architecture is one thing, and then you'll find a lot of really well built curb work, and you'll
Hmm.
also find cobbled or brick paved streets almost everywhere. And when I first got into this research, a lot of people thought we were looking at dirt roads and paved sidewalks. But as I got further into the research, what I found was the I mean, you can't quite make it out in this photo. Um, what looks like a dirt street is actually dirt, a thin layer of dirt covering brick or cobble paving stones, which I found almost
Okay.
everywhere.
Hmm.
Yeah, and then you'll be able to see it in a lot of other places. Let's see if I can give you some more examples. So a real problem with what I have with it again is that short duration of standing time. You can see how massive this structure is. This is in Denver, Colorado, the Arapahoe County Courthouse. 2 years to complete this in the 1880s. Now, if I were to ask you, Carla, your impression of Denver, Colorado in the 1880s, what would be your visual impression based on what we're told about history?
Oh, it'd be like Louis L'Amour, cowboys and, uh, like you might see in, some of the mining towns that you see in movies, right? The fake front wood
Mm,
buildings. Yeah,
mm.
you wouldn't see spectacular buildings like this.
What
You
would
wouldn't
your
expect
impression of the people be? Would you say refined, rough around the edges?
probably rough around the edges, yeah.
Gunfights, spittoons?
Yeah,
That's my
yeah,
impression as well. That's what I'm taught about history.
yeah.
So we're to believe that in 1881 they built this with a dome on top in Denver, Colorado. Um, and those were the types of people that were supposed to have been living there, and they were able to construct something like this. I
Right.
find it hard to believe. I find it
Yeah.
hard. And then they go ahead and tear this down in 1933.
Huh.
So again, it gets a 50-year timeline, and this is a clearly solid stone brick structure. You know,
Mhm.
so what it seems to me that is that there was a concerted effort to eliminate a lot of these structures, um, especially throughout the 20th century, especially during that timeline of the world wars,
Mhm.
where they were erasing generations and then they were erasing the physical remnants of the past. And then after World War II, it goes into overdrive with the urban renewal process, where based on a promise of renewing these places, which they most of the case they didn't, they destroyed massive amounts of cities, um, and basically they turned into slums and
Yeah.
projects and the rest of it, right? So, from my perception and from my research, tying all this together, it to me it looks like a coordinated effort to erase a lot of this. You know,
Yeah. Well, it sure does. Now, when it was built, say, I don't know if there was a lot of hotels or apartments. Do you think surely the large buildings weren't all single family dwellings, right?
uh,
Did so many people travel all over the world, like in the airships or other means of transportation, that there was a widespread need for large hotels or apartments back then?
well, so yeah, you're going back now into the old world when it was a functioning system. Yeah,
Mhm. Yeah.
it's a great point. Yeah, and I have touched a lot on a lot of the old hotels, multi-storied structures, landing docks on the top for
Mhm.
airships.
Mhm.
Very interesting point, and very social as well. These hotels had amazing gathering places, whether we called them coffee rooms or restaurants or ballrooms. You know, you could tell the social
Mhm.
aspect of society was very important. That also lends to what we see with the opera houses and theaters, and farmers markets as well. So these were all very prominent, and arcades. Arcade is a little less common these days, but I found some amazing what we would call arcades, which would be like an open air shopping area, gathering place.
Okay.
Um, I found many of those amazing ones too.
Now,
Yeah.
now you mentioned farmers markets.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What you've the old world had those that
Well,
used
I'm
or
I'm giving it the name that we were given it. I don't know exactly what they were used for, but they appear to be
Mhm.
gathering places centrally located in the towns, and
For
I don't doubt. Pardon?
outdoor
Yeah,
space.
outdoor. Many of them covered and amazing structures. I wish I had an example offhand here. I'm trying to think of one. We might see one. But they were also very ornate, just sort of similar to the way that this one was built as well. And it just tells me, looking at all of this infrastructure, that well, first of all, these cities were all sort of laid out in a very similar way, and they all
Mhm.
seem to have these aspects to the um, infrastructure of the city, having these places where people could meet. It would seem to be a very important part of the culture. So,
That kind of ties in with our conversation throughout the video, right? Of Atlantis rising, right? And of the need to talk with another person, right? To spark your mind and cause that growth.
how important that is, and then it also ties in with the very recent attempt to isolate us.
Absolutely, just crossing my mind too.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Um, yeah. So yeah, we talked about, also the performing arts. So this is the one we looked at in Minnesota, the Opera House. Um, Massive structures too, right? Multi-storied massive structures. But I think the performing arts must have been very important as well. Musically, I would assume, vocals. I think a lot of what we have as a part of our human culture is the old world. I think we are the old world. I think we've been hijacked and modified, and I think we need to get back to that. I think culture is all remnants of the old world, that once existed much more vibrantly. Do you
Mhm.
know what I mean? And we've been
Yeah,
moving away from that down through the 20th and 21st century.
we have,
The,
yeah.
yeah, the fact that there were so many opera houses in North America is mind blowing. I've done some videos, and your viewers can go check out my channel. And I did a live recently with Lucius Aurelian on North American opera houses, and it will absolutely blow your mind if you were not aware of the concept of opera houses in North America. Like, sure, you've probably heard of the Met, um,
Mhm.
in New York and a couple other big ones, but these things were also everywhere, small town everywhere. It's unbelievable how many places had an opera house.
Well, yes, and locally where I grew up in, the surrounding area, there was any town that now has a population of, say, 15,000 or something like that, um, has one of the old world, what I would call old world buildings in it now, with the that was an opera house, and
Hmm.
they're called opera houses still.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't know about you, but I mean, I grew up rural, and maybe that's why, I don't know, or maybe it's my upbringing, but it's like I'm not real fond of operas. It's like it's highbrow, or
Yeah.
or the music is, I mean, some is really what I consider really good, but otherwise sometimes it's the way they sing, I can't really understand the words of it. So what was the purpose then of the opera houses back then? Do you think they did different performances as what we would see
Honestly,
now?
I honestly don't know. I know a lot of them had pipe organs. Pipe organs seem to be in a lot of these structures. Opera very well could be implementation from the inheritors, when they hijacked these buildings. I can only speculate, honestly.
Mhm.
I would imagine musical instruments were a very important part of the old world. Um, but yeah, I can only really speculate. I think that our interpretation of entertainment now has been altered from what it potentially was, and you see that really getting into the 20th century when everything becomes a theater, a movie theater. It's like
Right.
these opera houses become movie theaters, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then they tell us they were built for that purpose, which seems to me to be ridiculous. Some of them only standing for 30 years, and then they tear them all down in the 60s. I have some examples of that as well. Um, this is a good illustration of what they do to these structures, though. So this one's not entirely demolished, but you can see how this one looks in the modern day.
Oh,
So they decapitated this structure at this point right here, it looks like.
they took all the fancy stuff off, right?
They sure did. And can you imagine if this one still stood in Duluth in this state?
Yeah.
So what I think that these are visual triggers, these structures. And you can just imagine if this building, instead of looking like this, still looked the way it did,
Hmm.
how many people's heads would turn walking down the street, walking by that, making you question the history of it all. But you won't question really that. That's just a 2-3 story structure built in the 1890s,
Right.
1880s.
Yeah.
So that's also a part of the illusion, is to diminish these structures down through time. The removal of statues, the removal of towers and spires on many churches. That's very, very common. Um, the removal of the refacading of these structures as well, making them look a lot plainer than they once were,
Mhm.
as a part of that illusion as well. So if they
Right.
don't completely demolish it, I think um, they're modifying them and taking that the beauty off of them. And that's, I mean, that's brutalism, right? I'm sure you're
It
aware of that term.
is. It
Um,
is. Yeah.
that was very widespread after World War II. Brutalist architecture was the name of the game. Clean lines, basic boxes, you know,
Yeah.
it was like a revolting from the old world almost. Yeah.
Um, but just a thought came to me again, like we were talking about how you needed to talk to another, and it sparks your thought and your mind. But I know through history, at least part of the history we're told, right, is that a lot of ancient times there wasn't the handwriting, right?
Mm,
The word of mouth, or there wasn't books anyway, and so history was passed down word of mouth
mhm,
through song or
mm.
folklore, and was a very important part of the history. But at the same time, how easy that makes it to change history too, right?
Well, yeah. So you can tell us. I mean, that's always interesting. You can say that these people didn't have the written word. Maybe you just got rid of the written word. Whoever invaded there just got
Yeah,
rid of their written word, changed their language. I mean, we know that process has gone on here on the continent. Um,
absolutely.
I don't buy it at all. Yeah, you're right. It's easy to change the history, and you can say, "Oh, well, this elder and this person remembers the history of the past, and they're going to pass it down verbally." But how do we know that that's the history? How do we know that that hasn't process hasn't been manipulated? And it sort of gets in. This gets into the World's Fairs a little bit too, because what they were doing is portraying people in what they were telling us was their native habitat. They called them human zoos, where
Yeah.
they were taking people from all over the world and showing us the way they lived to give us an impression of the way the world is or was supposedly. Um, so I think that's evidence to me that there is a definite intention to lay out the framework for the way the world, what the way they wanted us to see the world and the way they wanted us to see history. Because history is a big part of it too. You get into the whole Darwin aspect of it, and all the Royal Societies working so hard in the 1800s to, you know, put their stamp down on what exactly happened in the past and where exactly we are in the cosmos and all the rest of it. Looks to me like a very concerted effort to manipulate our perception. And anyone who questioned that, well, we could just toss them in the asylums.
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
another topic, right, right.
If you don't agree with the convention, that seems to be what happens, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, wow, look at that one.
yeah. This one's in Winnipeg, Manitoba, in Canada. Um, Built in 1886. And another problem with these is the very small populations at the time of construction. Like if you were trying to envision a structure like this being built in your hometown, how many people, first of all, would you probably need in that town to justify that type of construction? You know
Yeah,
what I
you
mean?
yeah, you'd need a lot, you'd need a large population.
I live in a town of just about 100,000 people, and there's no way we could justify building anything along these lines. Um, I mean, of course we don't build like this anyway.
Mhm.
But Winnipeg, if I look at the population demographics here, in 1886 should have had about 10,000 people living there, and this was supposedly the city hall they decided to build at a time when we didn't even have the technology to that we do in the modern day.
Right. Now this picture, it's a good example, I guess, of several that I've seen on your channel as well as other channels. That it's like the base part where you actually enter at street level. That's
Hmm.
all like underground now, almost,
Hmm.
right? And then you can see where the main door and half the windows start above it,
Hmm.
and that's what we see as ground level now,
Hmm.
right?
Very interesting. Like it's pretty widespread with these old structures to have the entrance here, half a story above our current grade level.
Yeah.
Um, and then the lower areas, and this is even interesting too. You see this a lot, the entry beneath the stairs, um, going into this lower level, right?
Hmm.
And yeah, and and it's prominent everywhere. And I don't really know what to make of it. You were touching on the whole mud flood, and was there a big modification process? So was there a cataclysm, and were those that remained of the old world, modifying what was once there, and maybe maybe the new grading level everything had to be modified to accommodate that, and was that a part of the old world before the invaders came over and and invaded these communities or cities? These are all hypotheses that are um, worth discussing, and I don't think any of us know for sure, but there definitely seems to be a grade issue with a lot of these structures for sure.
Or, we talk about cataclysm, but at the same time, was it caused or did it occur naturally? I was just thinking of was it the most recent one of the My Lunch Break, I think that came out I think Saturday, right? I think they come out one
Yeah,
Saturday. And
yeah.
this one was about all the many ancient buildings or civilizations, towns of Egypt that
Mm.
were consciously um, flooded and now under lakes and everything. And that just occurred like in the 60s or 70s.
Hmm. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so could have, if you're given that and that happened now, well, maybe someone consciously flooded everything then too. I don't know.
Well, and in my research, like I said, I've touched on a lot of small towns, mid-sized cities, large cities, particularly in North America. And if they don't have a great fire, then they've definitely got a great flood. E- They all have either one of the two, or both, or multiple floods, especially during the early 1900s. You see this a
Mm,
lot. The flooding, the 19 teens seems to be a prominent era for flooding in a lot of these mid-sized towns. The Great Fires seem to span from mid 1800s to early 1900s as well. So um, there seems to be a catastrophic process going on there. Whether it's being used as an excuse to destroy these areas, or if it legitimately happened, whether it's naturally caused or modified, these are all things up for discussion. You can go deep into that realm as well. How
mhm.
much control do these controllers have over the realm? I mean, these are all things
Right.
that are worth discussing for sure. But there seems to be a process of destruction going
Mhm.
on there for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. This one they tore down in the 60s. So the story behind this one is that it was falling apart. So it
Mhm.
was 70 years old, same age as my house. My house isn't falling apart. This is built out of brick and stone, and they tell us it was falling apart, so they had to tear it down.
Yeah. Yeah.
I laugh a lot in my videos as well, in
Yeah.
my presentations. Yeah. There was a point early on in my research where I wasn't as sure about what I was seeing, and I would have a lot of doubt. It's like, okay, well, maybe they did just work harder, and maybe they did just have a more skill back then. And I don't doubt either of those, to be honest with you. I'm sure they did work harder than we did, and I'm sure there was much more hands-on skill. But something is not right about the timeline. It really did nothing. None of this fits. Makes any sense, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah. Same timeline here. Another one in Canada. Oh, this is one of my favorites. Los Angeles is actually spectacular, and I think they've done a
Mm.
lot of demolition work in Los Angeles.
Look at that front door. It's almost like round, right? Like a vortex you're walking into.
Mm-hmm. Reminding you of a cathedral, almost, that
Yeah.
entries, the
Mhm.
multiple layered entry. Usually in the cathedrals,
Mhm.
they have statues rolling along there. Yeah, this was supposedly the old county courthouse, built in 1888 in Los Angeles.
Hmm.
Now, how many people do you think lived in Los Angeles in 1888? If you were to guess.
Oh gosh, I have no idea. Was it over 100,000 at that time?
Well, I'm going to have a look here, and so because I do like to provide population demographics to help sort of illustrate the point with my videos. 1888, 1890, there were 50,000 people in Los Angeles.
In
So 1888.
1890. Whoa.
Hmm. Hmm.
Huh.
So they felt justified to build a courthouse like this. Before that, of course, 1888.
Wow.
It's hard to envision, isn't it? Yeah.
It certainly is. Now, how many of the buildings would you say, are percentage-wise or whatever of what you see, have the clock towers versus the cymatics or the stained glass thing? Because
Well,
not all that were just churches had the stained glass, right? Or
no,
the
there are a lot with the cymatic shape, I suppose, retained. A lot of them were. I think this has to do with the designation, what we give them for a designation in the modern day. Um, I think what you're hinting at there is potentially it wasn't a clock tower, but there was some sort of cymatic pattern. Maybe that was
maybe,
replaced with a clock.
maybe, yeah, that
Maybe.
was, who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a good observation, and I think it's certainly there's a lot of potential for that to have been the case. Um, but but for the most part, the ones that retain that cymatic shape do seem to be the cathedrals. I've seen it on music halls. There's one in Cincinnati Music Hall is spectacular. It has a lot of the cymatics.
Hmm,
Um, yeah, but for the most part, I think that what they have to do is fit these things into the designation that they've been given, right? So it
hmm,
wouldn't make sense to have cymatic windows, I guess, on a courthouse. Makes
right.
more sense to have a
Yeah,
clock.
yeah.
You know what I like about this one too is it's not necessarily a dome. You see how that shape is, I don't know, oval or
Mhm,
oblong, you might say,
mhm.
with a little ridge on top.
That's
Very
interesting.
interesting. Yeah, it's
Mhm,
very unique. Um, very interesting shape on that one. And so the reason I put these books together, specifically focusing on North America, my main reason was to compile visual evidence of structures that no longer stand and put them in one spot. And the second reason was for people to, as you're browsing through these books, to come to the realization that these actually did exist here on the continent, and they only existed. We're told they only existed for a short period of time. So I've given these books on demolished buildings to people that aren't have no interest at all in this subject matter, don't even know this subject matter exists, and that you can see the juices start flowing and the questions start being asked in their heads as they browse through the pages, because it doesn't fit our perception of the past. You know,
right.
yeah, there's no way in my mind, Los Angeles, they built this when there was less than 50,000 people living there. This is a castle. This is all stone. It's absolutely spectacular.
Oh, it
Um,
is.
yeah.
Now, I was just looking at the very top, like you pointed out, on
Mhm.
much fewer buildings, sure, but the still the when the oblong appears, then there's often the Sphinx, or you would call
Mm.
the not the Sphinx,
Griffin?
the
The Griffin?
Griffin at
Yeah.
on facing north and south or east and west on
Yes.
the top,
Yes.
right? Now,
Yeah.
this one fits the style with the flares on top, or whatever you want to call them,
Hmm.
fits the flares on the top of the rest of the building.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
so I wouldn't think it was changed. But yeah, you find the griffins
Yeah.
on some of
Yeah.
those
You
ones.
find them in a lot of places. I think I did Madrid recently, and they were all over the place in Madrid. The Griffins.
Yeah,
So they really seem to be everywhere. And that okay, so here you can draw the correlation between Griffin and the old flag of Tartaria, right?
right.
Or I
Mhm,
think lunch break uses that symbol a lot,
mhm,
just to illustrate that. So the Tartaria topic is interesting too, because a lot of people that are in this field of research don't like to use it because it implies a region, right? Tartaria being that Russian area.
mhm.
And early on, I think in this research, a couple of years ago, I suppose, a lot of people were trying to debunk the whole Tartaria theory, because it was that small region of the world. Um, but a lot of people, you will use the word Tartaria to symbolize or to indicate the old world. And I use the word old world, but they can be used interchangeably, and doesn't necessarily mean that part of Russia. It's just a lot of people are just saying this is a worldwide civilization that was erased, right? So I think it's
And
important to bring that up. Yeah.
yeah, like isn't it Lucius Aurelian that he has the theory of what, five different eras or something, and
Yeah.
that the Tartarian era is the third, I believe, the center of the five.
Yeah. That's his framework for doing a lot of this research. Is that five eras theory? So yeah, and then it's interesting. I mean, again, it's all up for discussion. I think.
Mhm, mhm.
I think the only thing we know for sure is I think what we're being told is not the truth or the whole truth.
Yeah,
That's for sure.
for sure. Look at that. What a
Yeah.
pretty roof on there.
Well, it's funny that you say that because this is the old New York City Hall post office and courthouse,
Huh,
and it was designed by this architect Alfred B. Mullet, and it was not well received. It was
huh.
commonly called Mullet's monstrosity.
Huh.
Does that look like a monstrosity to you?
No, no.
They
Huh.
do this a lot too. They'll use folly as well, folly and
Okay,
monstrosity to
okay.
explain the reason why it had to go. Is the way they
Mm.
explain that, right?
Yeah.
It's absolutely spectacular. That mansard style curved roof,
Yeah.
and as coming from the building side of it, as a carpenter, um, the degree of difficulty to do this type of work here is absolutely off the charts, especially without the technology we have in the modern day. It's absolutely spectacular. And then you're going to put little stone cupola on top of this
On top
roof.
of it.
Like,
Yeah.
it's absolutely spectacular.
It is. Yeah.
You know,
It's
come on.
beautiful.
1939, it had to go. It was used to
Oh,
extend City Hall Park to the south. So they didn't even replace it, they just extended the park.
oh goodness.
And
Yeah.
you find this type of wording in the historical narrative, the diminishing of the architecture, and that's another thing that really got me into this research. Is that part of it. I'm just going to stop my camera for a second. I'm going to close the door. It's getting cold. I can still hear you though.
Okay.
It's still pretty cold up here in northern BC.
Yeah, it's chilly today here too. We had like 80 degrees on Sunday, and then yesterday and today are like 60. And it's hard to get used to the flip-flopping of temperatures we have. Yeah.
Yeah, that time of year. Yeah, we were lucky to get 80 degrees in the next 2 months up here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, uh, let's see. We'll keep going. I'll show you a few more of
Yeah,
these if
sure.
you like. Let me know if you want to
Sure.
switch over.
No,
Um,
you're fine.
this is the old Marion County Courthouse in Indianapolis. It's an amazing city in Indianapolis. That's one thing with this research is my appreciation for these cities has really, really increased doing this research. I'm realizing what was once there. And I know I get a lot of people in my comments saying it's not like that today. You wouldn't want to walk down that street in the modern day. I do get a lot of those types of comments. But what was there? Um, Absolutely spectacular. This Marion County Courthouse, Indianapolis, 1876. Now that's quite early in the timeline, if you ask
Yeah.
me.
Hmm.
And have a guess what you think the population of Indianapolis was in 1876.
Oh gosh, I don't know, 10,000?
A little bit more, about 50,000. About
50.
50,000. So it's similar to that Los Angeles timeline here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then I've touched on this quite a few times in different videos. I think I singled it out in a video. What they do over time, often before they demolish it, and this one gets demolished in 1962, what they do is first they'll remove the tower. That'll
Mhm.
happen halfway through its lifespan. And then what they'll do is remove most of the upper area, square it off, or remove it completely and cut the building off at this flat line here and put a flat roof on it.
Hmm.
And at that point, it's becoming an eyesore to the people walking by it because all they're seeing is the bottom three floors, and it's starting to look a bit dilapidated because maybe they're not taking care of it. And the justification for demolition, um, not always, but often it's flies under the radar, and they just end up demolishing it. Sometimes there is an outcry for the preservation of these, despite the fact that they end up tearing them down. But often these things they diminish them before they tear them down, so the people won't protest as much. I suppose I found
Well,
that.
Yes, but it just the terms are even very similar to planned obsolescence
Hmm.
versus planned destruction,
Hmm.
and how that was employed through the early 1900s in advertising
Hmm.
and in changing the building design, right, from or not just buildings, but in home appliances,
Hmm.
even, instead of making things that are going to last a long time, you plan their obsolescence so the company can have more income. So it seems to me a parallel in
Hmm.
mindset
Hmm.
in steering the population.
Yeah, they have to ingrain that philosophy into us, so we accept the removal of a lot of this. Yeah, I think you're spot on with that for sure.
Hmm.
Interesting too. You can see all the gates and I don't know if you can make these out. All of this decoration, what you might call decoration on the upper areas of this. These are all metal, right? And some people will say, well, that's just a weather vane to catch lightning. But part of the theory with the old world, as mentioned earlier, is that there was some sort of connection with the ether energetics of the realm itself and the outward area, and the harnessing of energy through the buildings using well, you can see up here there's a little ball, and a lot of times I've seen so many of these without flags, these poles without flags. um, so these buildings are potentially drawing energy through the tops, energy from the ether through the tops, and energizing these buildings in whatever needed to be done. And this sort of gets into the building materials themselves. A lot of these building materials, the stones, the bricks, even the mortar, the marbles, are all crystalline in structure.
They would have carried the charge,
They
wouldn't
would have carried the charge
they?
exactly.
That would
And
be
so
cool.
it makes sense. There's something there, and it's very difficult to put your finger on. And there's researchers have done some very interesting research on this. I haven't delved too deeply into it. I just usually like to bring the visuals, but I think there is something there, and
Would
and they were able to store this energy in these structures.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking back to the opera houses. I'm I'm guessing in the past and maybe in the present too, but if you're regardless of my feeling about opera,
Hmm.
having being in the presence of a live orchestra
Hmm.
is just amazing, right? You can just close your eyes and feel the vibrations in the air. And
Hmm.
to think that that would have been happening just in the whole building, not even with music, just because the building was vibrating, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
That would have been amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I've also had people contact me with their theories on this, and um, mentioning the importance of a cooling system or a grounding system of this energy. And this now gets into underground aquifers and fountains. You see a lot of
Okay.
fountains
Hmm.
out front of these structures,
Wow.
and somehow the water and the ether had to work in conjunction with each other, the water potentially being a grounding, the purification of the water itself with the harnessing of the ether. So I do think there's something there, and you can see it in the structure of many of these cities. What I found is where there was once central fountains, often in the middle of street junctions or out in front of structures like this, um, they were replaced with war monuments.
Oh, okay.
There seems to have been a
Mhm.
process there of removing the fountains and then replacing those with a homage to. I mean, it's an homage to the fallen. No disrespect to the fallen who fought in the
Mhm.
wars,
Sure.
but almost an homage to war as well. So I think there was a process there, and I feel like I've seen enough cities now to draw some correlations that I may not have been able to make a year and a half, 2 years ago.
Right.
As you see more of it and you see repeating patterns, right, these theories
Mhm.
begin to take shape. So there's something to it. There's a lot of research to be done in this field. We need more people with eyes on, with interest in this, and I do think it's a very interesting field of research. Even if you're not looking for it, I can draw you in. I think I've seen a lot of people get really enamored with the structures themselves, right? So it's
Right. Oh, yeah.
to me, I'm
But
baffled. Why wouldn't you be interested?
oh,
That's
no,
that's
really.
sort of how I'm. Yeah.
But But I was thinking about, you had mentioned perhaps the relation of the energy and needing a cooling system.
Mhm.
Well, that would be tie in directly to so many of them having tunnels, right? And many floors underneath. Wouldn't that possibly be storage and cooling as well
Ex-
as whatever else they were used for?
Exactly what I was thinking. Yeah, exactly what I was thinking there. And what we're finding as we go deeper into this research is that almost every place had underground systems as well, had these tunnels. Admittedly, so with a lot of these structures, they say, okay, this courthouse was connected to the adjacent buildings underground. And my thought is like, okay, well, you did that in 1876. Okay, I guess so. Um, they don't even account for any of the underground work in the timeline. But yeah, you make a great point. I think there's something to that, and that also lends to the theory that the circuit board, or where a lot of this infrastructure is very old and very firmly rooted in these regions. Ancient cities, I think, what we're looking at here. These are old. When I say ancient, I have no idea on timeline. I suspect even our concept of time has been changed.
Yes. Yeah. And um this spring, like what, 2 weeks ago maybe, it's like um and maybe I think it's not just me, but I've been dealing with time, right? An
Mm-hmm.
issue with time and trying to, always get things done in a certain time or whatever.
Yeah.
And our kitchen clock broke. I was in the middle of all this time, and the kitchen clock broke. But I think it was meant to be, right? I think and I'm not going to replace it until I find just the right one. But I think that's part of the plan, like to help you get used to a different frame of time,
Mm.
so that it's not as important. But it made me wonder if all these things were so awesome and we just don't know that they were there. Maybe the more we find out, they can be brought to life again. I'm thinking of that storage and the communication.
Mm.
Even if the buildings aren't all there, if parts of them are left, can't th- if the grid was redone or
Mhm.
came to life, couldn't all parts of the grid then come to life that used to be part of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a great point. Yeah, and are we moving back toward that?
I would
And
hope so.
is our perception of this tied with that moving back to? I mean, that's part of the anchor of why I do what I do is to get more eyes on it. You know, to expand this concept in the human consciousness, and then you have more people, and then it sort of it exponentially can grow the more people become interested in it, because a lot of the deception is making us disinterested in our past. I think that's part of the problem, and that's one of the one of the ways they hide this is, well, what do you care about the past? Why does the past matter? I've had a lot of people say that to me. That's all in the past. You know,
Hmm.
it doesn't matter anymore, right? And that's part of the deception, I think.
Well, and I see that in my work in some ways, like the importance of our ancestors, because we're made of all their memories and just of their DNA in general. But
Hmm.
it's like the connections. Some people have great connection with the history. They can go back several generations anyway of at least what they've been told, and the next generation told the coming generation. So
Hmm.
goes back. But some people don't know their grandparents,
Yes.
and it's like there's something missing.
Hmm.
Not that they're at fault. That's just how it
Hmm.
happened in their life, how things worked, right? They weren't taught that, but it's or weren't close enough, or perhaps there was feuding, or bad relationships or something, and so ancestors were kind of gone by the wayside. But um it's sad, not having that ancestral connection, and so I think maybe some of that is what we might feel toward these generations that lived before. Some innate yearning
Hmm.
within us to understand ourself in
Yeah.
understanding them, right?
Yeah, that's a good point as well, and it makes me think of the erasing of our ancestors. I always think of the two world wars, and I don't even know if what we're being told about those is true as far
Right.
as the way that it's told, but um, that's an erasing of several generations consecutively. Not entirely, but um, quite in a quite a large way. My ancestry on my mother's side goes back to the Russian Revolution. The reason that we're on this continent is because my great grandfather fled the Bolshevik Revolution, and what happened over there was the literal erasing of history, right, with the
Mhm.
Bolshevik Revolution. In the name of erasing the aristocracy and the monarchy, they wantonly destroyed history on that part of the world. But this has gone on all over the place. You can go right down through the 20th century. You can go into communist China, Pol Pot, what happened in Cambodia, right? That was a literal erasing of history as well. But this has gone on everywhere. So they've been the powers that should not be, if you will, have been overtly erasing our history. So as much as we grasp for some sort of, I think that's a part of it. We know that the attempt has been there to erase it, um, and it's very difficult to get a firm grasp on what it was once like.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. Yeah,
I
it's
don't know.
going on all over the world, right?
It has, yeah. Actually, I'll jump over to some visuals from all over the world just to give you an idea of how uniform this architecture really can look like,
Mhm.
right? And I think I can just scroll through and I can explain where these places are. This is just in New Hampshire. Um, this file that I put together that we're looking at, the intention here was to illustrate the widespread use of the streetcar or rail
Mm.
car or whatever you want to call it. But you'll also get a good glimpse of the type of architecture that was prominent across the realm. You can see this here too. That's you just barely make it out, right? Wondering
Right.
why. And there's a good example of the flagpole without the flag,
Mhm.
and another one there. But I'll try to scroll through and show you from all these different um, areas. This is Los Angeles. I'll try not to go too fast, but I do want to show you some other places in the world. Detroit. This one's Detroit. There you have a nice central kind of what I was talking about. I would suspect that this was probably a fountain location, central fountain
Mhm.
location. Don't know for sure, but it has been replaced with some sort of monument there.
Mhm. It kind of looks like on that one that you just showed
Yep,
that both the kind of triangular to the right as we're looking at it to the right
yeah,
between
here.
and also the one between the building on the left that shows it looks like there could have easily been a fountain in
hmm
front of each of those buildings.
There and there, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
so it lends to that theory a little bit.
Mhm. It does.
Um, yeah. So yeah, the focus on, like I said, this file was on the streetcars themselves. This is in Erie, Pennsylvania. Um, Part of the narrative on the streetcar, I'll just divert a little bit to that topic again, is that they were originally built to be pulled by horses. So before the invention of electricity, the widespread invention of electricity, we were told that they were constructing these tram lines in these cities to be pulled by horses. And then eventually the technology came about that they could be used, electricity could be used to move the trams, which I think is, to me, is more of a recapturing of old technology and a re-implementation um, of a grid system that was already there. I don't see the logic in creating all of this infrastructure for horse-drawn carriages.
Oh, it
Uh,
makes no sense at all because they already had wagons.
exactly, and the
I
wagon can turn the street it wants to turn on. It
Yeah, it
doesn't
can
need to
go
follow a track.
wherever. Yeah, that makes no horse-pulled,
hmm
trolley cars makes absolutely no sense to
It's
me.
silly.
Yeah.
It's quite silly. Yeah, yeah. There's Philadelphia, and you can just see also so the scope of the architecture itself should really trigger something as well. The multi-storied aspect at that early time period. This is horse and buggy area, so we're looking right at the turn of the century with this photograph of
Mhm.
Philadelphia. The fact that they built such massive structures, um, again, it's I don't know. To me, it just doesn't fit. what we're told of the past, and the Hollywood perception too, because a lot of our perception of the past comes down through us through entertainment, through the visuals we're given, and it's always portrayed as much more diminished than what we're seeing in these photographs. Like it gets more into, again, the rough around the edges kind of people back then, and um, plumbing is a big one. The widespread use of indoor plumbing. I mean, my mother, again, grew up in Duluth. They didn't have indoor plumbing until the late 50s. And that was somewhat rural, but
Wow. Yeah.
it just illustrates to you how late all of these things were in coming to us. So it lends to the theory of reset. Because when you see structures like this, you can't tell me that plumbing wasn't a part of the thought process as well. Like,
Or
I don't know.
or that people were so different that we didn't have excretion of any kind.
Well, there is
Wow.
that theory too, right?
Well,
Uh,
it's possible, right?
yeah, yeah.
That the at whatever point the buildings were built, that our human design was so much um, a higher voltage
Hmm.
and higher use of what we did eat,
Hmm.
that there wasn't much
Hmm.
excretion. Yeah, I
Hmm.
mean, it's
Yeah,
possible.
it's interesting. Yeah, and that lends to that theory that we have fallen in that regard, the densified in
Yeah.
some way. Yeah. I'll try to get off continent here. I have a bunch from North America. This is Pittsburgh. Um, Let me just try to. That's Plattsburgh. Here we're in Poland now, so we've jumped across the continent, and similar architecture, similar road works, streetcar full effect. This is in Krakow, Poland. Um, Very ornate as well. The lighting systems and the energy systems. You'll see these everywhere. I just love the ironwork on a lot of these power poles, if you will. You know.
Yeah, amazing.
Okay, sorry, I just have to take a call. Apologies.
No, that's fine. So I hope you all watching are enjoying our conversation. And again, this is Chris Kelly from the Old World Exploration channel. And there's a lot of awesome photos and descriptions as he talks about it on his channel. So you're welcome to go check that out. And if you're joining these pictures that he's showing us now, he has two books out, at least two, that are each called like 101 um, buildings of the old world that have been demolished. And so that's what he's been showing us pictures from. So
Sorry about that. That was my 9-year-old's home from school today. School was calling to check where he was.
that's all right. No problem. Yeah.
I'll show you some more. So we're in Warsaw, Poland now, and notice, yeah, the streetcars. Also notice the distance between buildings. I've highlighted this quite a bit in my recent videos. It seems that the infrastructure, so the spacing, the street sizes, were laid out in this manner to accommodate um, several lanes of traffic. In
Hmm.
fact, so much so that in the modern day we're able to have double lane roads for cars in either direction. Um, Not really making sense when you think of the transportation at the time, why some of these roads would be so wide, unless this was all part of the infrastructure at the time of uh, of laying out the civil engineering for these towns, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Hmm.
Something to think about as you look at some of these places. Here's another example back in Warsaw again. Because remember, this whole technology only really becomes widespread in the 1890s, really, the streetcar technology. So much of the infrastructure around it, especially in a place like Warsaw, they'll tell us that this was built much more previous to the implementation of the technology itself. So there's a disconnect in the narrative there,
Hmm.
from the way I can see it. All right, we're still in Poland, and we'll jump over. Still in Poland. Spectacular infrastructure and architecture, though, wherever you look. This is another thing you'll see in a lot of these early ones. This is clearly not real. This
Yeah. Weird.
or
Yeah.
this guy here, right,
Right.
drawn in. that's a lot of it seems to be drawn in, actually.
And some photos of the old photos, you can almost see through some of the people.
Yes,
It
yeah,
looks
and then some of the theories will say that that was just the way exposure worked at the time. But there has been a rebuttal to those theories. But there are definitely questions to ask about a lot of the visuals that we do get from the past. This is in Auckland, New Zealand now, so we're way down or out, if you depending on your perspective.
Mhm,
But we're seeing very similar features here, right?
mhm,
So the width of the streets, the style of the architecture, little subtle differences, but I mean, this building back here. You can see the dome, right?
mhm.
Auckland, New Zealand. Um, Sydney, Australia. So, I mean, if I told you this was Vienna, you probably would believe me,
Yeah.
right? Um, some of the Australian cities really blew me away when I first started looking into this stuff, and I get people from there who have been screaming out for like, yeah, we got a lot of it here, that are into this stuff, and you know, begging me to do videos on cities in Australia. I've done a couple of
Mhm,
Melbourne, Sydney, um, but this lends to the whole idea that this was everywhere, and
mhm.
the historical explanation will be that it was the colonial powers that came in transplanting their architecture to these regions and then having the convicts build all this kind of stuff. It's just absolutely silly.
Yeah. Untrained, right, in a year. Untrained people building it in a year. Yeah.
That's a major problem I have with the historical narrative is the fact that as long as you can get an architect to design it, anyone can build it. That's seems to be the
Mm,
logic being used here, and it's certainly not the case. Anyone again who's done any of this, any kind of fancy work like this, will know that the individuals doing the work need to have a firm grasp of the overall build and a very very skilled and very organized. Um, Certainly not convicts.
Well, that some case in point, my brother, of course, this would be back in the late 70s and early 1980s, and he had grown up. I told you before we started, my dad was a bricklayer, and so my brother had worked a lot with my dad, and then he went to university and majored in architectural engineering. And in the architectural classes, there was so in the projects they had to do, all the grades were given on spectacular um, um, display or what do you call it? A drawing or put modules on how fancy the buildings were. And here comes my brother who was used to building it and making things work, and he knew they wouldn't work, right? So he made things that would work and didn't get as much as the grades as the real fancy ones that there's no way that they would have worked in practicality in building them.
Yeah, that's very common. Again, coming from a perspective of being in the building trades, the disconnect architects are so focused on form and tend to forego function. And that's why we have architects and engineers working in conjunction with each other in the modern day to make sure whatever the architect drew up will work structurally. And
Right.
modifications tend to be made. Columns are thicker, beams are made thicker, stronger than drawn up. Um, our the story we're given often with many of these structures is that the architect was untrained. The architect submitted a design in a contest, and the design was chosen among a group of other people who submitted the design. And it's very strange that that story repeats itself so much. But you're
Hmm.
right. It's a good point. There seems to be no sense of engineering. The assumption being made is that architect and engineer was once the same discipline, and they had it all with the same brush, and they were untrained. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's absolutely absurd. I did a little bit of work early on in my channel with the late Matthew Smith. He recently passed, but he had a channel, Marvelous Old World, and he was an architect, based out of Seattle, and obviously he was looking at this architecture saying there's no way. A real asset to the community, and he'll definitely be sorely missed, but his perspective on a lot of this, I think, was very valuable, because I think a lot of people in those fields will have some sort of revulsion to this research because it thumbs its nose at the sacred cows, if you will, of the discipline. There's a few big names coming out of the 1800s, the H.H. Richardsons, Cass Gilbert's a big one. There's a lot of big names in architecture that are revered that are being put into question in this field of research. So most people will renounce the field of research as conspiracy or whatever you want to call it. So my hat's off to him for taking that stance, for sure. And to me, it seems obvious, and you'd think more people would be going down this road that are in these disciplines. But again, it's a threat to your livelihood in some way as well, I
Oh, well,
suppose.
well, sure. Yeah, it would be. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Interesting. Yeah.
All right, I'll show you somewhere else here. Let's jump over to
Oh, wow.
Baltimore. We're in
Wow.
Baltimore now. Amazing two-story mansard roof here, right? You got, notice
Mm.
also, I'd like to get your perspective on this. What do you think of the sunshades here on all the windows?
Well, I've noticed that on quite a number of different buildings that I've watched through your podcast and others, and it's like, what are those made of? Are they metal? And surely they're not just sunshades because you wouldn't need that deep of one, would you? So I wonder if they were part of the electrical accumulation or the electrical, say, like the solar grids like we have now, or this. Maybe they was attracting more energy.
Hmm, that's interesting. It does look very uniform and a part of the original. So it's yeah, I don't know. And you see it
Mhm.
everywhere. You can see it on the building back behind here too.
Yeah,
These ones don't have it, but maybe they once did. Don't know. Um,
because like for people that had the buildings that could build like this, surely they could make shades that pulled straight down and
mhm.
wouldn't need all this exterior architecture to be the sunshade, right? Unless there was a purpose behind them.
Yeah, it seems a bit strange. I remember early on my research too confusing these for bells sometimes. I
Uh-huh.
thought, oh, those kind of look like bells. No, they're not bells.
Do you think they're all fabric or canvas, or do you think they're metal?
Well, there's obviously some sort of frame there, right? On these ones, you can
Mhm.
see, and definitely some sort of hoop frame down below. Um, I suspect there's probably some fabric there. Maybe it's a modification from old and new. Honestly, don't know. But I do find it interesting that it was very widespread um,
Yeah.
at that time. And
And say if it was fabric, the maintenance of those, or were they able to make fabric of different kinds that withstood through many years compared to what fabric the 2 or 3 years a fabric awning might last now?
good point too, because the exposure to the elements, um, yeah, would weather these in a hurry, wouldn't it?
It certainly would. Yeah.
Yeah. And that also gets to weather itself and the weather patterns that as we know it today. Maybe when these structures were built, maybe we were in a much different place as far as the elements. Um,
Mhm.
Chicago jumps out at me, the city of Chicago, some of the buildings that they said were built in these short periods of time. There's absolutely no way with the winters in these places that they were doing the work. We're told they were done. Mortar doesn't set beyond a certain temperature, right? You need to
Right.
heat these places. So maybe these things were built at a much more temperate and favorable climate to where we are in the modern day. So a lot of things to consider with this stuff.
And that would point to a cataclysm,
Sure would.
perhaps, even if it was man caused, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Sure would. Sure would. Yeah, that's a good
so-
point.
Something that would totally misalign the sky clock
Mm-hmm.
to cause the temperature changes, right?
Hmm. Oh yeah, I was thinking earlier. I wanted to get your perspective. I'm sure you're aware of even the annual calendar that we're on right now, and The disconnect between the lunar and the solar. Like a lot of people have done, you see this a lot in social media pops up. It's actually a 13-month calendar, but we've been,
Yes.
you know, and the new year starts in April, and I find that very interesting as well. So we're kept out of rhythm intentionally, it seems to
Yeah.
me.
Oh, I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. This is in Antwerp, Belgium. Again, note the wide streets. So these
Mhm.
are structures, been around for a while. Um, Remember, the technology for this only comes into being in the late 1800s. So we have to assume that they had the forethought to know that a technology like this potentially was coming. And the way they laid the streets out was for
Yeah.
something that hadn't been invented yet. Mm.
Wow. Sure. Yeah. Sure. Now, in the far distance, the tall building,
uh,
there's one a spectacular view of that dynamics in
uh-huh.
the large window, or what do you
Do,
call it? The stained glass up there.
what do you think that building is designated as?
Well, I would assume a church or something, but not necessarily. Is it a government building?
Train station.
A train station?
Yeah, that's the Antwerp, the old train station. It still stands, but it's been heavily modified. A lot of the glasswork has been altered on the front. Um, yeah, it's an
Wow.
amazing structure. One of the best. One of my favorites for sure.
Well, now that would really um, go into the theory behind the electrical grid that was all connected with everything. If these, because I know even say like in St. Louis, Missouri, and Kansas City, even my husband's a
Hmm.
big train buff and
Hmm.
model train guy, and so I hear train
Hmm.
information on a side. And so many of the Union stations had spectacular buildings, and many of them were glasswork of different kinds, right? And so that really ties in with the theory of all the grids being charged somehow and connected.
Yeah, and a lot of the theories get into the rail systems
Hmm.
being a part of the old world, and
Yes.
what was happening in the 1800s wasn't necessarily the building of the railroads, more so as the reconstruction and repair of an old
Hmm.
system. Modification, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But there's also a problem with the timeline that we're given for the construction of the railroads. Touched on it in a lot of videos as well. Um, the amount of work that needs to be done to lay track is not just the laying of track, but the leveling and the
Hmm.
dirt work. Uh, so there's a problem with the timelines as well. I think there's a famous story like the track laying race. I think it's 1869
Hmm.
where they're racing and they're doing 10 miles of track
Wow.
a day, and then you calculate modern day and how many miles of track they could do a day, and they couldn't even do it in the modern day. So
Yeah.
problems with the narrative, right? So and then what do they say? It's a lot of the Chinese built the railroads and all died on it. So there's no, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't
Right.
know. I think a lot of these are cover stories. But when you, like you say, when you look at some of these train stations and you look at the infrastructure, the massive sweeping
Hmm.
trusses in the roof systems, massive open areas. You mentioned St. Louis, the
Hmm.
castle, right?
Hmm.
The Union Station Castle, basically
Yeah.
in St. Louis.
Yeah.
Uh, these things were everywhere as well. Yeah, there's something more to that story for sure. And a much older mode of transportation, I believe, than what we're being told.
I think it would have to be, and it was so sad even in, like, our lifetimes, or I remember in mine, I think I was in junior high and, high school when the train tracks started to be removed everywhere around, Kansas anyway,
Hmm.
and then for many years, you'd see piles of, um, the 4 by no, the 8 by 8, ties that
Yeah.
were left everywhere, and then eventually they all disappeared and became walking trails.
Hmm.
And then there's that theory then Michelle, Gibson had and it might not have been her theory, but, where they were using our energy, or people that walking the trails, that the energy tie-in grid is still there,
Hmm.
and that they use the energy of the people that are
Hmm.
walking. Um,
It's very interesting.
it
Yeah,
is.
and I was thinking of and that's another problem with the historical narrative is that these technological advancements are too short-lived. So what we're told, first of all, that the canals were built before the railroads.
Hmm.
Canals are a real problem too, because there's no way they had the time and resources to build a lot of these canals, and they're everywhere. But a lot of them, they're told, were built and were used for a very short period of time because of the railroads came in. And then the railroads really, I mean, not a short period of time, but the railroads are almost, a novelty now. You're going to
Hmm.
do any sort of trip by rail,
Right.
it's a novelty. And the implementation of the internal combustion and automobile, um, and there was actually a concerted effort, and tied in with government. I did some research on this as well, to eliminate the rail lines and that mode of transportation and implement the highways. And this was happening in the 50s and 60s, and a lot of the big names, General Motors, and a lot of those types of companies had a huge hand to play in the creation of the highways in North America in particular, and the elimination of the rail lines and systems. So again, there appears to be a coordinated effort with the tycoons of these industries and government to erase these modes of transportation
Yeah.
that we have left over from the past. Another part of the urban, you can tie that right in the same timeline as the urban renewal, right? They're making roads, they're paving over brick pavers, paving over these rail lines that are in the middle of the streets.
Well,
Um,
and this ties in, because I didn't know that, not but my husband had said, it didn't dawn on me to think differently, but the trains, especially the because even the electric ones, I think you only needed a tiny fraction of the electrical part to get it going, right?
mhm,
Or something. And then the train really can run without hardly any fuel or
mhm,
any,
mhm,
compared to the thousands and millions of semi trucks with one
mhm,
person. So the trains can use so much less energy intensive and can carry so much more capacity of whatever they're carrying compared to the semis. But yet that was all done away with
mhm,
to
mhm,
just use trucking system,
mhm,
which
mhm,
is very energy intensive, and then you have to upkeep all the roads everywhere, right?
mhm. Yeah, I mean, it starts to look like a concerted effort to erase that mode of transportation for sure, and not just advancement of technology. Certainly not necessarily advancement, but more alteration.
Yeah.
Have you heard of the collisions they used to do, of the locomotive collisions for entertainment purposes? That
Oh,
was
for
the
entertainment. Well, my husband
Yeah.
probably has. I haven't. Didn't know they did it for entertainment.
Yeah, I think it was again in the early 20th century. I think this was something you would see at carnival type events. Um, they would line up two locomotives and have them collide, and it was like yeah, it was a source of entertainment.
Oh, wow. Like,
Mm.
goodness sake.
Celebrating the destruction of the old world, right? How getting us to celebrate the destruction of the old world,
Yeah.
almost. That's how I look at it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Here's Narrow Street. This is Boston. Oh, there's a nice look at some of these awnings,
Yeah.
and so you can see the hoop there on the bottom, and
It's, so they do look canvas or fabric of some
they do,
kind.
yeah. And there's
Yeah.
some over here as well, but there's some pull down blinds there as well.
Hmm.
So it is interesting. Yeah, I don't know what to make of that. Very very elaborate and intricate architecture, though. Perfect. That's
Yeah.
really what drew me into this research: the perfection and precision of what we're seeing with a lot of this stuff. There's doesn't seem to be any margin of error. You really get a sense of it when you look at the interiors of a lot of these places.
Hmm.
Again, something that is not really accounted for in the timeline that we're given for their construction is how elaborately ornate the interiors are and how long that would take to do that.
Hmm.
Really doesn't make any sense. Let's see if I can jump over to, oh, here. I like this one. The horse-drawn buggy collecting people for the insane asylum.
Oh, great. Shoot.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Thank,
Kind of sums it up.
thankfully, it's empty.
That's right. That's right. Hmm.
Oh, goodness sakes.
Oh, here's Buffalo. Buffalo's an amazing city too. I mean, they're
Mm,
all there's. I do have some favorites. I should do a favorites video one day.
there you go.
Um, yeah, but Buffalo is absolutely spectacular. Again, the wide streets. And you can see the bottom here. Something's going on here. You can see the blocks or bricks that have been pulled out. I don't think this is construction. I think this is destruction. This does not look like the way you would stack bricks if you're building. It looks like more the way you would stack if you were removing. Interesting cars too. You see these?
Yeah.
What do you think those run on? Those electric, I would say.
Well,
Some sort of.
you'd think they would have to be, or you'd makes you think that they were horse-pulled wagons that were converted,
Hmm. Yeah,
or I don't know.
I've come across a lot of these in postcard form, and they're like sightseeing tours of the cities. They were
Okay.
like these little mini buses.
Hmm.
They looked like they were electric. They had the big brake or gear in the front, and they were sightseeing tours of that town, of that city, whatever it might be. I've seen it all over the place.
Hmm.
Interesting aspect of the past in some of these places as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one here in the foreground is in my demolished books. This is the Erie Savings and Loan Bank in Buffalo. Um, Spectacular structure.
Mm.
They demolished it in the 60s, I believe, and it took them several months. And apparently it was quite the struggle for the demolition crews to get this thing down. The walls are 6 feet thick at the base.
Whoa.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Made to be a bank, we're told.
Huh.
I don't know. This looks quite old as well. This church with all the ivy growing on it.
Yeah.
Looks like it's been there a little while. Nice crisp photo, this one too. Some of these old, I think it's Detroit Publishing, had a lot of very nice crisp photos from the turn of the century. Really nice ones to zoom in on in some cases.
Hmm.
Yeah. See if I can hop off continent again as promised. All right, we move over to Dresden in Germany. Quite breathtaking, quite a tragedy what happened to Dresden. That was that Allied bombing of Dresden. They basically decimated the city, we're told, after the war was won, or right near the end of the war.
Hmm.
Supposedly a sanctuary city for artisans. So if
Huh.
you were an artisan and not militarily involved in the war, I think you would have flocked to Dresden as a place of refuge, was designated as such, and then it was
Then
it's
destroyed.
a horrific story. The Dresden story is absolutely horrific, and architecturally magnificent city, as you can see in this photograph here.
So they purposefully concentrated the number of creative people that and then destroyed them?
So the story goes, yeah,
Huh.
and it was Allied bombings, right? As the
Yeah.
British and the Americans worked in tandem, we're told to bomb the city. Yeah, but look at the architecture. I mean,
Wow.
amazing city, amazing city. But again, we're seeing the same evidence of like you can see how widespread the streetcar was, right? And
Mhm.
we're told that I think it was upon invention of the electrification. Within 2 years, this is everywhere. This electrified streetcar, from really when the most. I was just looking it up this morning, but people can do a quick search for trams, the history of tram cars or streetcars. Within 2 years, they were pretty much everywhere. So
Wow.
that to me is like the flag goes up and says, well, that sounds a little bit too quick for all of that technology to travel that fast and be implemented that quickly all over the world. You know,
Mm.
and you can see the statue work in here, I
Wow.
think, as we
Wow.
zoom in. Yeah, it's beautiful stuff.
It is. Lovely.
Fort Worth, Texas,
Mm.
not to be outdone. I just think of pistols shooting Fort Worth, Texas, and um, same infrastructure, uh, very similar anyway. Yeah,
So, in many of these photos that show dirt, because like the left-hand side looks like it's dirt, right? The right-hand side looks dry anyway.
hmm
But so it's really just over a layer of brick there too, is
that's
what.
what I think. Yeah, in this picture you can't quite make out the brick grid, but in a lot of these, um, I have discovered that, and
Okay.
it looks firm. If you look at the
Right.
wheels,
Oh, it
no,
does. Yeah.
that is not embedded in any sort of mud or dirt, but it's sitting on top of something. So
Hmm.
that's what I think, and probably used the dirt as a layer of protection for the horses and wheels of these things. I would think that would, and that's another thing too, like brick pavers or cobblestones and horses' hoofs and wagon wheels don't really go together all that well, I
Very
think.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can imagine the vibration as you're as you're going down the road in a wagon over the bricks. Um, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's that's sort of been my observation.
Certainly be uncomfortable riding in them.
Yeah, that's what I mean, right? There's another two, like the amount of horses needed in these areas for what was there, the amount of stabling, the amount of manure cleanup. A lot of these things are pretty. The numbers get pretty high when you do the research. Same with the construction themselves. And you must be familiar with John Levi.
Uh-huh. Yes.
So he had a book, Old World, and they sort of lay out the construction timelines for some of the buildings in San Francisco at that early time period, and they get pretty detailed as far as what it would have taken to construct these buildings, how many horses you would have need, how much food you would need for the horses, how much water you would need for the horses, stabling for the horses,
Mm-hmm.
and it gets to a point of the absurdity when you start to put the numbers together, right?
Right. Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's problems there as well. Again, this isn't Dijon, France, but again, you see these central locations and what we talked
Mm-hmm.
about earlier, potentially fountain locations, maybe, but similar type of open areas, very open areas actually around the buildings. I could certainly envision a central fountain on at least one of these little islands in the middle. Um, just a hypothesis, but an observation just from my research.
Mm-hmm.
Back to Germany now. This is Frankfurt, Germany, and we're getting the fountain. There's a good
Yeah.
example of a
Yeah.
central fountain. Making sense, probably turned into a war monument or just paved over and made into an intersection eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I could keep showing you. That's another thing too. I've been at this for 3-4 years now, and I've amassed tens of thousands of visual um, examples. That's what actually got me into making my channels. I spent about a year collecting photographs and postcards, and I just had this urge inside me to, like, I need to share this with people, not just the people around me. It wasn't enough. I needed to share these visuals. I wanted people to see what I was finding and get their perspective on it too. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of what drove me into this, into making these videos on my YouTube channel, right? And became an outlet for that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. And the interaction has been so valuable too. The comment section is my favorite place to go. A 95% positive interaction as well. I get so many interesting stories, people of all ages, really interesting stories from people in their 70s that are remembering back now to their time in their high school or elementary school and what once stood and what no longer stands, and getting a
Mm-hmm.
real rich visual of these locations based on people's different perspectives from where they're from. So very rewarding in that regard. The channel has been for me. Yeah,
Yeah. Awesome.
yeah.
Awesome. Wow.
This one is interesting, actually. This is in Dresden again. I don't remember the name of it, but apparently they rebuilt this in in the late '90s and early 2000s. I'm just going to go off memory here, but this is something that can be looked up. If somebody puts a church in Dresden, I can't remember, you'll find it. It has been repaired, and it looks like this again. Some of it was still standing after it was bombed, and then they wove in the new and the old, so you can see the two different
Hmm.
tones. Supposedly built in the 1700s, in a 17-year time span, maybe, and reconstructed between the 90s and 2000s in an even longer time span in the modern day than it took them to build in the 1700s to reconstruct it. And the interior of the modern one certainly looks more like a modern interior, much less ornate, I think, than what likely originally stood. There's a quality difference to the finishing that we do in the modern day that I don't think we can duplicate. But this is an interesting structure because they did, and this was a huge project in Germany to reconstruct this church. Very highly celebrated by the people in that area. And one of the ones that I did have somebody attempt to rebut my suggestion that we didn't build these the way we're told. And right away, I found out that the reconstruction in the modern day took longer than the original 1700s construction. So I don't know.
Wow. Yeah.
Make of that what you will, I suppose.
Right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Yeah, Munich, Budapest, beautiful city. Budapest. I did do a video on Budapest, Hungary. But again, you're probably seeing the similarities in architecture no matter where we jump to.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Very, very,
definitely.
yeah,
Yeah.
lending to the idea that there was some sort of worldwide um, unification, worldwide
Mhm.
civilization. I don't know. There's something there for sure. I don't think it's all just random appreciation for the same architecture or whatever you want to call it. Right? There seems to be
Well,
something there.
yeah, especially without much radio, TV, internet, right, at those times to spread the word so that people would want to, keep up with the Joneses, so to speak. One town keep up with the
Yeah.
next.
Yeah, they weren't sharing via Zoom. They weren't doing Zoom calls or.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Genoa, Italy.
Look at that on the right-hand side. Is that destruction or reconstruction going on?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some destruction that's gone on here, and an old wall embankment going on here. Interesting area, Italy. Um, there's depictions of Rome half covered in mud that we see from depictions from the 1600s.
Hmm.
Um, in this field of research, the whole Pompeii timeline has been called into question. I think our historical narrative tells us Pompeii, the volcano, went off about 2,000 years ago, something like that. And a lot of other people have said it doesn't really make sense based on maps and things like that. And it makes more sense to have happened 1500s ish. No, I'm just going on
Hmm.
a memory here, but
Right, right.
that would coincide with a catastrophic event that we're hypothesizing may have occurred within the last 500 years, or a series of subsequent catastrophic events.
Hmm.
In my mind, I'm thinking one big one, and then a series of subsequent um, aftershocks, almost, if you will, or and then also a concerted effort to destroy a lot of these places um,
Right.
by the inheritors of the realm. But
Yeah.
it's all a working theory, so
It is. It is.
yeah,
Well, maybe show two or three more, and then we can
sure, sounds good. Yeah,
wrap it up for today.
yeah.
Oh,
Uh,
wow. What a pretty one, though.
Back to Genoa, Italy. Notice the similarities with the Budapest, and you're seeing it in Spain as well. If you get in, I did one on Madrid recently. Very similar, spectacular structure here, though. Beautiful,
Right.
right? Yeah. I'll try to get a different location for you. I'm gonna give you two more if I can find a couple of my favorites. It's hard to say I have favorites now. There's just so many. I'll give you. Well, that's Rochester, New York. And again, the rail lines. I find this one interesting because this is where the roof starts down here. So you've got one layer of mansard roof. It's another layer, and then it becomes plumb again, straight up. So you got a tapering. You can see it on the corner here actually pretty well. You've got a
Right.
tapering, and then another tapering, and then this level seems to be straight up and down. And then they even put a little tower on top of that with a little dome structure or whatever
Wow.
you might call it. All right, last one. I could go on forever, but Providence, Rhode Island, we'll finish on. So, and then I like to tie in the North American architecture and the European architecture, and just to show these similarities. I think it's
Yeah.
important.
You know, viewing these, I mean, I could view them all day, right? Yeah, I mean, they're just spectacular. It's so interesting. And but reminds me of the plethora of um, shows, TV shows over the last number of years where people are going in and flipping houses and things,
Mm-hmm.
and each one in itself is kind of spellbinding to some degree,
Mm-hmm.
with the changes that they're going to make. But wow, uh, to have these that you've put together and other people have put together so that we can see the changes through them and the similarities across the world. It's just awesome that you've done this and put your time there. Thank you. I really do sincerely thank you for doing it.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure, and like I said, I found I had to do it. There's no way I was keeping all these to myself after I started accumulating all these visuals. Like I got to get these out somehow. So that's that. I'm not a real tech savvy guy. It's basically just a screen share and slideshow, and then some narrative over top of my videos, and I'm good with that. You know.
Yeah, I'm just typing in the chat here.
Mhm.
Everyone, I was so listening, I didn't even pay any attention to the chat. So just telling people thanks for being there.
Mhm.
So well, Chris, thank you so very much for sharing with us all your expertise and all that you've learned. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and then it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Actually, I'd like to do it again sometime, possibly, if you're
Oh,
interested.
oh yeah, yeah, that would be great fun.
I
Very
appreciate
much
your
so.
perspective on all this, actually.
Well, thank you, thank
Mhm.
you. All right, well, we'll wrap it up for today then. And could you tell people how to find your channel and about your books before we go?
Yeah, Old World Exploration on YouTube is my main location. I'll actually just pull it over so people can see it. And there you can see the channel. If you go to my links section, you can see I've got my 2 demolished books, North American Demolished Buildings. I also have a Rumble channel, so if you're on Rumble, you can sub to me there. I put both. I post at both locations. Although there's a lot of lives on YouTube that don't make it over to Rumble, so you'll get more content on YouTube for now. I have ways for people to donate. I have a little merch shop, and like you mentioned, the calendar. There's the book I did with John and Melissa. I think those are all the ways that you can sort of check out what I do. And like I said, right now I've got 275 videos. You might find the city that you live in. You might find it interesting, but there's lots of stuff to go through there on my channel. So
All
that's the
right. Great, great. Well, thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate it. I'll remove that for now. And so we'll just say goodbye. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and we'll catch you next time.